What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Odin coming back with the box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny coming in $10 million underneath where it was projected to end up globally in its opening weekend, only making $130 million internationally and only $60 million domestically in its opening as far as the current projections are. And this just means this film is destined to lose a crap ton of money. We're talking not only hundreds of millions of dollars, but probably well north of $200 million in financial losses, saying that they have confirmed essentially that this movie cost around $300 million before you account for any type of marketing cost. So let's just say this movie is in a very, very bad state, and hey, could not happen to a better studio. Yet another $100+ million loss for Disney. And we thought that The Flash's box office was bad. This looks like and is set up to be even worse than the situation currently going on for The Flash. I also wanted to point out before diving into the numbers themselves that shame on you, Deadline, because I've had issues the last few weeks, especially trying to find these articles from Nance. Good old Nance over at Deadline. And the reason why is because I just found out today that originally, whenever I would look up the box office news, you would find Tony's domestic and Nancy's international numbers all under the box office tab. Apparently, over the past few weeks, they must have decided to switch this over to the business side of things, which, again, you would think that this would be underneath box office, seeing that it says international box office in the title. I don't know why they made this choice. I don't know why they ended up making the decisions that they did, but hey, I found it nonetheless. And so good old Nance is reporting indeed $130 million in a global opening. Of that, $70 million is from 52 international markets, meaning this film has opened up in the vast majority of international markets available to it. So there's no random country that's going to come by and swing by to save the day for this movie. It goes on to say that Japan, where older audiences lean into nostalgia, has been good but not phenomenal, while Latin America and Asia Pacific are lackluster, meaning it's not doing well anywhere and is not likely to do well anywhere in any capacity. Looking at the actual numbers over at thenumbers.com, $60 million being its overall opening weekend numbers domestically at 4,600 screens. Now, this is something I actually talked about on my my own live stream last night on OMB Reviews, that if you actually go back to the original Raiders of the Lost Ark, that movie opened up a lot less, a lot smaller, even when you adjust for inflation versus this film. The difference, though, is that the first movie only had about 1,000 theaters in comparison to the 4,600. So when you adjust for inflation, the opening weekend for Raiders was about $25 million. So the fact that they got $25 million at significantly less screens means its per theater ratio is a heck of a lot better than the 13,000 per theater that Indiana Jones is getting. Ultimately, what that means is that this movie is the worst performing Indiana Jones film ever. Now, again, I know that some people might be complaining because you can't really say the same sentence with Indiana Jones in this film, as you could not say the same thing also with the the infamous movie that came out back in 2008 as well. We don't talk about those. There's only 3 Indiana Jones films, darn it. And I totally agree with that overall sentiment. But interesting nonetheless to compare the numbers that we have in front of us, as this, again, being one of the worst performers. Not only that, if you compare this to some of the other recent box office flops, this movie is right up there as far as total sales. Even when you look at Crystal Skull, that film made well over $200+ million in its global opening. So let's just say this film is in a lot of trouble. To no surprise, Spiderverse is still in the discussion, still in the top 3, 5 weeks out from its initial release, making another $11.5 million, bringing its total domestic to $339 million. It's starting to lose some theaters, but hey, this film is still coming in the number 2 spot, still performing very, very strongly, and still having very strong holds to boot. What is interesting is that Elemental's domestic holds have actually also been pretty strong. The difference is that those holds are coming from very small numbers. So the opening weekend for Elemental was very, very small, and so even if you have a strong hold, that doesn't mean a whole lot if you're holding from something very, very small. That's why its domestic is only $88.7 million. It's been out for 3 weeks. It's a Disney Pixar movie, and it is yet to make $100 million domestically. That's why this movie is also set to be a massive $100+ million, possibly even upwards of $200 million flop for Disney. Couldn't happen to a nicer company. No hard feelings based on the numbers that we're getting. A 50% drop in week number 2. Jennifer Lawrence proving herself to not be the first action star, to not be the first romantic rom-com star either, because no one's really going to see this movie. This film is set to be a box office flop for Sony. Not a huge loss, mind you, because it didn't cost all that much to make. But hey, she's not bringing people out there, so maybe she should try a little piece of humble pie, maybe just a little bit. Coming in the number 5 spot is Transformers: Rise of the Beast, dropping 40%. Again, a film similar to Elemental, where it's having some pretty strong holds in certain areas, in certain markets, but it's not nearly enough to make up for how little it's made overall, how little it opened to, and how much money and how much of a budget this film had for this film also to still inevitably be another flop for Paramount. Paramount has been in a much better position than some of the other studios, especially when compared to Warner Brothers and Disney, but with this movie, it is not looking good. Notice how I can't even mention the fact, or I have not mentioned yet, the fact that the number 6 movie, so not even in the top 5, is a brand new animated feature from Universal, Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken. Now, granted, the trailer for this movie looks terrible. I do think it's funny that they seem to be throwing some shade towards Disney by the fact that the villain in the movie is a mermaid, and the mermaid is clearly what seems to be a ripoff of traditional Ariel with the red hair and everything. So I don't know exactly what that had to do with anything. The trailers, though, really weren't all that compelling, so I'm not really surprised to see that this movie's not making a whole lot of money, not bringing people in. Let's just say, though, worldwide, this is a very bad start for a Universal flick, for a Universal animated flick, and so I do not think Ruby Gillman is in a good position to make any money back either. So, again, lots of flops happening this year for a lot of different studios, but no more so than what's going on with Disney. So again, looking at the international numbers, $130 million worldwide for Dial of Destiny. Again, I honestly don't quite understand what in the world they were thinking. They were clearly not thinking when it came to this movie, because all the decisions that they made were just seemingly were made to drive people away. Any hardcore fans, seems like they just didn't want them to go see this movie. For any casual fans, even, I would consider myself a casual fan, they also just basically seemed to make decisions that would make people think, yeah, this film's not really that good. It's not really that entertaining. It's not having any sense or having any value to go see it more than once. So we're just going to go ahead and leave it, and it's going to be forgotten. I mean, that's honestly the worst part of this movie. Not only is it a terrible Indiana Jones movie, it's just also a forgettable film. And I think that is actually one of the worst things that any film can be. It's one thing for a film to be bad, all right? I would go to Crystal Skull and say that film is bad, but I still remember certain aspects of it. This film is just not even bad. Like, it is probably the worst of the Indiana Jones movies. It's also just downright forgettable. And I honestly think that ultimately makes this film much worse, because at least you can remember certain things from Crystal Skull, whereas this film, oh boy, I can't even think for a moment. Spiderverse, though, coming in the number 2 spot, has crossed $600 million worldwide, vast majority of that coming from the domestic marketplace. This film doing quite well, still making money, still adding to its profits. So looking at maybe ending between 650 and 700 million worldwide. So very, very strong. And a very, very, very impressive build-up from the previous flick, which also did pretty well. Elemental continuing to be a box office flop. Again, look at that domestic versus international numbers. You typically, for these types of movies, want to see not only those numbers higher at this point in the release, but also you want to see maybe a little bit more coming from the international. Only 10 million more has come internationally so far for this movie. This film set to be yet another box office bomb. And again, for a Disney Pixar film to be in the financial situation that this movie is in right now, it's really, really bad. No hard feelings. No hard feelings, Jennifer Lawrence. No one wants to see your movie. $49 million worldwide at this point in time. Transformers, $379 million. And then the number 6 movie, Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken, has only made $12.7 million. Now remember, many films tend to make about a third of their entire worldwide box office in their opening weekend, right? That's the average, and so sometimes it could be a lot more, sometimes it can be a lot less. But if that were to play out, if this movie were to perform like a typical, just a generic movie, that would mean that this movie would cap out somewhere around $40 million worldwide. If that happens, even though this film did not cost nearly as much as some of the other films that we've just been talking about, it would still be a far cry from the amount of money that it needs to break even. And speaking of that, $70 million budget for this movie, again, much less than the $300 million that was cost of Indiana Jones Dial of Destiny, much less than the $200 million cost of a film like Elemental. It still needs to make about 175 plus million to break even. So if right now it is on track to make only about $40 to $50 million internationally, that's going to be quite a lot of financial loss for Universal. We can make some projections on No Hard Feelings this week, though, with $49 million after the first 2 weeks. That means that I can project based on historical standards. The film probably will end somewhere between $70 million and $98 million, respectively. And having cost $45 million to make, of a break even of $112 million, that means this movie is set to be a financial failure, losing somewhere between $25 and $8 million. And again, that's on the low end of things. I use a 2.5 times multiplier. Many people use a 3 times multiplier. And if you do, obviously, those losses go up quite a bit. Looking at the current box office, though, for some of these other movies, with Indiana Jones' cost of $300 million, it needs to make roughly $750 to $900 million, depending on the metric you use, to make its money back. At $130 million right now, it's looking at being currently around $300 to $400 million in the red. Now, some people may not understand why. If it costs $300 million, why does it have a loss higher than its budget? Well, that's because typically they will spend about half of that budget in addition to it, meaning you take the budget, multiply it by 1.5, and that gets you your total cost. The budget of 300 plus the marketing, which would typically for a movie like this be around 150. They probably spent a little bit more on that, and I know that other channels have been covering those minor details about. Not minor details, but those details of what the actual marketing budgets are given for a specific movie. The issue is that when it comes to studios, especially like Disney, they try to keep these numbers as close to the chest as they possibly can, meaning these films might have actually cost more than what's being reported, and also even the marketing budgets could be more or less than what's being reported. I just go by based off of what is officially being stated and also typical standards, and so that's the reason why we get to this number. In either case, no matter how you spin it, no matter how you look at it, the film being over $350 million currently in the red, and the prospects of this movie flying off, and rather just falling off a cliff next weekend because of the reviews not being good, the word of mouth being terrible for this film, means we could see projections even higher than what we've seen for other films, right? I thought Elemental's numbers were bad, right? That film was set to lose well over $200 million at the box office. I thought The Flash numbers were bad, right? That film also set to lose probably north of $150 million. Remember that this is based off of them saying the film cost $220 million. I think the film probably cost a lot more than that, but still, I thought that this would be one of the biggest films. It's looking like Indiana Jones Dial of Destiny will probably end up being the biggest flop of this year. And that's a year full of several films that have flopped quite a bit. And when you are in the same company as films like The Flash and Elemental, oh boy, could not happen to any nicer companies in Warner Brothers and Disney. And it makes you start to ask the question, how has no one, especially in the higher echelon of these companies, been fired? I know there's been other people that have been let go, right? The people involved in Lightyear got let go, for instance, but we're talking here about much bigger names, much bigger people. Why are they still around? That is a question that I think anyone that owns stock in these companies needs to start asking of them and of the board of directors, etc., whatever person that you can actually reach out to. But those are numbers as they stand. What do y'all think? Do you think Indiana Jones is going to be the biggest flop of the year? Right now, it is. Right now, it is set to be. And again, if it follows a typical average movie, it's going to only get to maybe $400 million worldwide. And if it only gets to that amount of money, and it needed to make $750 to $900 million to break even, you can kind of see why this film is going to probably end up losing well north of $250 million and be the biggest flop. And again, could not happen to a nicer company in Disney. But let me know your thoughts about that. Anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button. Whatever you're watching, smash it. You guys have been amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. A blessed Sunday. And as always, God bless.